I promise you that about a third of the way into the talk, you're going to consider this the rantings and ravings of a tired high school teacher. Then it will get very theoretical, and then I tried to be a little bit more on the practical side, but I hope that you can find something in my talk. The Diocese of Phoenix has recently concluded a 54-day novena to Our Lady of Fatima, praying for, among other things, the strengthening of marriages and family life. And for those of us who live here, bias alert, we run out of fingers and toes counting the number of good, solid examples of the domestic church surround us each day. But we continue to pray, nevertheless, because we know how many Catholics around the country have become all too accustomed to the contrary. Considering of the goals of this conference, we recall from Laborum Exercens that one of the most important terms of reference for shaping the social and ethical order of human work is the family, says Pope St. John Paul II. Simultaneously, a community made possible by work and, I emphasize, the first school of work within the home for every person. But again, from widespread evidence in our culture, we know and understand that this first school of work, this community of work and solidarity, is not working, literally, spiritually, economically, and otherwise. In 2007, we've grown quite accustomed not only to navigating the pervasive brokenness of marriage, but even to being alienated by the foundational institutions of civil society, especially those who have succumbed to this anthropological revolution that repudiates the image of God in sexual embodiment. New laws boldly attempt to refuse the truth of created nature, the divinely ordained reciprocity of man and woman, the prerequisite of sexual difference for authentic marriage, and the consequent fruitfulness of their dominion inaugurated in family life. Already ravaged by the demographic winter caused by the West's embrace of contraception, we wonder how much worse can this get in the decades following Obergefell and the proliferation of gender ideologies. If recent apocalyptic insights do not specify the exact damage done to the nation's economy as a result of this brokenness and alienation, we can connect the dots. Catholic social teaching instructs that the common good is best served when it safeguards the truth that man and woman are called by God and fulfilled in self-gift to each other, and their work together gives rise to a still greater capacity of self-gift and communion, work bearing fruit in the community. However, more than a crisis specific to femininity or masculinity, our marriages and family lives, our first schools of work, are suffering a crisis of receptivity, of which the transgender phenomenon is merely a symptom. Certainly, it is easy to observe how such homes refuse the gift of life and now refuse to take the shape it takes in sexual difference. But even in many traditional households today, the work of dominion is severely flawed or entirely absent, eliminating the earliest lessons in what it means to receive, intrinsic to sexual difference, self-gift, and work itself, replacing them with harmful practices in the name of individual autonomy, sexual freedom, and reproductive liberty, lifestyles undermining the common good. My proposal, therefore, is that the work of a sacramental marriage, the work of dominion that unfolds and develops first in the domestic church, in all ways receiving and being received, should be embraced on the level of an apostolate. In other words, renewing the temporal order requires more than an apostolate of doing, it demands an apostolate of being. To use an unpublished remark of Dietrich von Hildebrand, a primordial evangelization that begins in the family, where receptivity foundationally shapes both men and women, and where the question of work, as lived through the gendered body and as self-gift in communion, takes on special significance and urgency. What do I mean by a crisis of receptivity? The new Hobbitons scattered few and far between around our country, family life is imploding, or worse, is not being at all from the outset of a new marriage. The average American family understands itself as a self-pleasing social arrangement and would have little idea how to respond to JP2's successive commands, be who you are and believe in what you are. Not only do they remain largely unaware of their ecclesial identity, their particular mission, or what it means to be the first school of work, but they also continue unabated in their capitulation to and consumption of a modern culture that attacks the very heart of their uniqueness. Undeniably, the ever-increasing frequency of disordered households, enslaved by technology, consumerism, and frenetic individualized lifestyles, computerized chaos disguised as liberty, an internal unrest striking at the heart of the family's communio personarum and obstructing the flourishing of persons. Consequently, children emerge from contemporary family life not merely malformed in virtue, but more seriously deformed in personhood. They have little to no idea of what it means to feast or to fast, to think or to remember, to work, to play, or to rest, because they have only an objectifying, fragmented, instrumentalist vision of reality, and even worse, of themselves. In Anthony Esselin's words, they have grown up understanding that unless they do something, anything, they will waste their life. They will be no one. They have cultivated no interior life, having lived under a tyranny of the useful, a childhood that has become mere preparation for adulthood, and a dull, drab, limited adulthood at that. Work has no other meaning than to rule, make money, or to perform, says Esselin. And while these children know that they have to do something, they lack the physical and psychological stamina for hard work, suffering from apathy and chronic impatience, as well as an intolerance of silence. It is predictable, then, that they would emerge from childhood expecting to continue the chaotic, activity-driven pace of life in which they were raised and educated, while at the same time wanting to do mostly nothing. It should be unsurprising that these dispositions shape students' expectations of post-secondary education and professional aspirations, motivating their singular pursuit of technical competencies and employability skills. Present company excluded, of course. The instability pandemic in our culture, the utter absence of any stable boundaries of space and time, is both cause and effect of the chaos plaguing homes. The frenetic rhythm of daily life, dictated by multiple workplaces, schools, sports, and extracurricular activities, schedules, amounts to untenable pace. Is lethal to the development and meaning. These are the lessons shaping little faith out of what's outside of what he cannot control. The typical outlook marked by activism and uncontemplative creativity. The technologized regard for everything, close to the authentic telos of created goods, even his own being and sexual difference. Since he has become habitually unreceptive to being and unable to engage with it in contemplation, He is only interested in what he can do with it or to it, without any consideration of its truth, goodness, or beauty. Constantly moving at an inhuman pace, he is obsessed with making and using and the corresponding pleasure to be derived therein, where having more translates into being and feeling more. The consequence of impatience and expectation of immediacy is thus not satisfaction in accord with the good, but anxiety and ennui amidst an apparent security and abundance. The humility of faith has disappeared, shattered on the arrogance of activity, says Ratzinger. Clearly, this construct lies at the heart not only of the economic and ecological crisis the world faces, but especially the spiritual one that lies unacknowledged at their roots. By now you are asking, where are the candles lit amidst all this cursing of the darkness? While this thesis may resonate with past conferences celebrating the feminine genius and foreshadow the upcoming 30th anniversary of Mulieris Dignitatem, it aims less to be a clarion call only for women and more to be a gesture, pointing both sexes to accomplish the work of dominion in the domestic church, attentive to this crisis of receptivity plaguing our homes. More specifically, for spouses to renew the temporal order through an apostolate of being means significantly refining their attentiveness to the rhythms and routines of daily living, vigilant towards what fosters authentic human flourishing and against what threatens it. Such a task requires both the masculine and feminine perspectives. At the core of such a proposal lies not a new parish program or political strategy, but rather an attempt to recapture the goodness and fruitfulness of receptivity and its consequences for work. Repeated numerous times throughout his papacy, Benedict XVI emphasizes this stance, the search for God and the constant readiness to listen to him as the necessary foundation of any culture. According to David Schindler, this readiness to listen to God and to all creatures in relation to God is the only possible foundation for authentic human culture, because such openness witnesses to and upholds the dignity of all creation as a gift from God. But what exactly does this apostolate of being look like? Living and working receptively was the spirit of the well-ordered homes of St. Thomas More and Saints Louis and Zélie Martin, the now sainted parents of Sainte Thérèse de Lisieux. Witnessed through their daily routines was their search for God and readiness to listen to him that grounded every moment, where patience did not simply refer to enduring suffering, but to a fundamental stance of waiting upon the good, ready to receive it and able to recognize it. Their respective quotidian of morning and evening prayer, daily mass, household and academic work, regular meals and leisure time, charity in the local community, unwavering respect for the Lord's Day, feasts, and cycles of the liturgical year, all spent together as a family, exemplifies authentic work, a true liturgy of the home. At the same time, the strategic retreat of the Moors and La Famille Martin did not include disappearing from the public square, but remaining firmly unattached at the heart of it, searching for God and listening to him, witnessing to the fundamental submission of thought, act, and will to the divine plan every single day. No explanation is needed for how their exercise of dominion bore fruit within the community. Their family lives illustrate concretely the integral relationship between work and leisure, both grounded in a radical stance of openness to God. Without a doubt, such an apostolate must originate with our beholding the model of perfect creatureliness and freedom, Mary, the Theotokos, the Queen of Heaven and Earth. From the Annunciation to Calvary, from Cana to her queenship, the Blessed Mother embodies perfect human receptivity, unblemished by original sin. And in the words of the late Stratford Caldecott, Marian receptivity should ground our understanding of human work and the fruit it bears in the world. He says, Mary's position before God is fundamentally one not of taking or choosing, but of accepting. This does not mean she is purely passive. Her fiat, the acceptance of God's word, was the summit of human activity. It was her own act, not that of another forced upon her. As the Immaculate Conception, her whole being was posited on gratitude. all of which should explain why Marian economics might be an appropriate name for the path of a genuinely Christian civilization, in which the fundamental unit of economic theory should be the family rather than the individual. A Marian economics? Certainly the female UMary students here will hear these words and my proposal as a demand not for a new and improved strain of feminism, but as a task uniquely suited to women by virtue of their already receptive nature, paramount to understanding what JP2 called the prophetism of the feminine, echoing writers from St. Augustine to Kierkegaard to Chesterton. Women can do so much to aid humanity in not falling, declared the Council Fathers in the closing message of Vatican II. And indeed, only through the woman doing just the opposite of what current feminism does can we restore a life-giving balance to society, says Balthasar. And he concludes, it would take deep moral decisions on the part of women to seize the spokes of the wheel that is rolling towards the absurd. For this renewal to take place, however, women themselves must first completely understand and gratefully accept their femininity, in the words of Alice von Hildebrand, recognizing its responsibilities, overcoming its distortions, cultivating homes and engaging culture, precisely without losing those qualities intrinsic to her being. A gift given and work made easier through contemplation and imitation of Mary's life and humanity. But receptivity is not just feminine, and such an apostolate of being cannot be the sole responsibility of women, given how God designed the sexes to work together. While receptivity implies passivity, masculinity is not contrary to receptivity. The passivity implied in being receptive is not opposed to all that is masculine. From the Son of God, says Pope Benedict XVI, one learns that this passivity is in reality the way of love. It is a royal power which vanquishes all violence. It is passion which saves the world from sin and death and recreates humanity. Obviously, a man receives differently and is called differently to offer his own fiat to God's plan for his future, an unknown that he cannot anticipate or calculate and for which he too must be patient. Harnessed for the sake of communion, the power of masculine initiative directed towards serving the family is attentive to the mission it receives and the contemplative action such a mission continually requires, embodied in children in their upbringing, for example. Consider St. Joseph's spousal relationship and St. John's filial relationship with Mary. She was indispensable to their mission. In the same way that Joseph received his mission through the message of the angel, and John, the beloved disciple, from Jesus at the foot of the cross, men of the third millennium must embrace the task of cultivating a receptive stance in a masculine way, modeling what it means to receive the mission of their family and to work for it, especially in day-to-day life, stepping into the breach as Bishop Olmsted has called them to do. A more concrete example of a domestic apostolate of being becomes especially vivid when we consider the disastrous consequences of the disappearance of the family table. Beyond the obvious correlations to skyrocketing obesity and plummeting test scores, the customary lack of family dining, let alone its regularity, impacts children deeply at the level of relationality, denying them basic lessons in receptivity, work, gratitude, and communion. Certainly, the young cannot articulate the structure of being as receptive dependency and authentic communion with God and others, but experiencing the converse teaches its own lesson. The routine absence of the family table plants seeds of loneliness, rejection, and isolation in the very place where the fruitfulness of love should thrive and the family's openness to God is lived concretely. Spouses' fidelity to providing the stability of the family table, nourishment embodied in all its forms, equates to teaching basic grammar in this first school of work. For all its banality and chaotic unfolding, the family table cements relationships, but on a more fundamental level, it serves as a daily reminder to both child and family of their unique identity that they have received as family. Having been drawn into a relationship with God on a filial and spousal level, the family lives out its receptive stance toward Him and His creation, not only but in large part at the table, through the food gifts being changed by human hands, made different because of His love for the family and because of the love between family members, as Professor Lucan mentioned. Indeed, the preparatory work of the food gifts and the personal sacrifices made for the table synthesize the essence of family life, to give myself while receiving the gifts of the other. His storytelling idiosyncrasies, their anecdotes, her cooking talents, our family discussions, while I myself am received in love as a person. For the growing child, every detail of the joint work of the family meal and the time and space prioritized for its unfolding affirm basic principles about the gift structure of being and created goods and the fruitfulness to be experienced therein. In doing the work of the table, spouses engage in a powerful apostolate of being. Absent these daily, ritualized, introductory lessons in receptivity and gratitude, children come to see themselves merely as machines to be fueled, wherever and whenever it is convenient. They become far less apt to comprehend God's loving and gratuitous gift of creation, intended to sustain the life of persons, rather than to be instrumentalized towards self-serving ends. We are left at the end of these reflections with no detailed conclusions, no blueprint for a Marian economy, but with some questions asked, says Caldecott. And I'd like to retitle my paper, Towards a Marian Economics, in his honor. When he made his comment, he'd hoped that the smaller Christian nations of Europe, freed from communism and alerted to the dangers of Western consumerism, would be inspired to initiate a Marian revolution. Little by little, he said, this revolution must begin in pockets of resistance, in communities and in networks of solidarity, networks of families as we see in Phoenix, Bismarck, Denver, and Rock Island. These revolutionaries are keenly aware of the ecclesial and missionary status of the Christian family, their iconic value and indispensable role in the Church's sanctification of persons and culture, because it is the original institution and quintessential community where personhood is formed, the common good is served, and truths about God, life, and humanity are preserved. The renewal of contemporary culture does indeed require work, beginning with the transformation of the person who works. But this first school of work where persons are formed desperately needs more attention. The renewal of the temporal order requires an apostolate of being, and such an apostolate must be understood and engaged by new spouses as they enter marriage and family life. To cultivate a Marian receptive stance within the household means neither to feminize husbands nor to disempower wives, but to carry out the work of dominion from doorstep to table with renewed attention to the structure of being, not only to how male and female work together rather than at odds with each other, but also to how receptivity, silence, patience, interiority, contemplation is indispensable to the formation of personhood and therefore to the fruitfulness of work. As spouses consecrated to their roles within their family, they are distinctly set apart and fortified for such an apostolate, not only to pursue holiness and to form a communion of persons, but also and especially to battle cultural demons for Christ and the kingdom. Let it be done unto us according to your word.